Hi, everyone. It's good to be able to break open God's Word with you again today. Whether you're joining us in our Zoom service by Facebook or by YouTube, I want to share a message with you that comes from the beginning of Samuel's ministry and has particularly speaks to us as we are thriving and surviving and working our way through this disruption that COVID has made in our lives. The topic for today's message is on that question. Are you going to thrive or are you just going to survive? You see, surviving, and these two words, thrive and survive, have been thrown around a lot on social media these days. We began this time of self-isolation with the idea that we're going to thrive, we're going to learn to do new things, we're going to get in shape, we're going to lose weight, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then as time has worn on, we said, maybe it's okay just to try and get by and survive. Well, I'm not necessarily talking about those things today. I want to look at this passage of scripture today and take a look and see what lessons do we learn as a body of believers, as a group of people, a community of people who follow God. How do we learn to survive, to not just survive spiritually in a disruption, but to thrive? The 7-month disruption is one that was in the history of Israel, just as Samuel was beginning his time of ministry. And in order to understand it, I need to sketch a little bit of history for you. So let's take a look. Samuel's historical context. Samuel was born around 1100 BC. Samson was born, and Samson was born with a promise that he would be the person who would begin to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. Now let me sketch for you who the Philistines were. Around the time that Joshua led the children of Israel into the promised land from the east, along the west coast from the Mediterranean, there was a culture of people who arrived. They were Aegean people, probably from Thessalonica, Greece, somewhere in that southern European area. And they set up a network of 5 city-states, and they began to develop their culture. And while you have these two cultures moving into this territory, there's going to be a place where they collide. And that's what happened along the west side of the mountains in Israel, is there was a collision between the Philistines along the Gaza Strip and the Israelites moving into the land and settling from elsewhere. And by 1100 BC, Samson is born with the promise that he's going to start to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Well, by 1070 BC, Samson is 30 years old. He's gotten into several skirmishes with the Philistines on a personal level. And at the same time, a young boy by the name of Samuel is born. And we talked about that in our last Sunday's message for those of you who had joined us. And Samuel is born within 10 years. In 1060 BC, Samson dies. Samson dies. He goes into the temple of Dagon in Gaza, one of the 5 city-states, and he heroically sacrifices his life to destroy the temple, and really begins the uproar between the Philistines and the Israelites. Interestingly enough, in that same year, Samuel, a 10-year-old boy working in the temple, hears the voice of God calling him for the first time, and he responds with a tender heart. And so this is the historical context. 10 years after that, in 1050 BC, the Israelites hit a year that is like their 2020. It's a time of significant disruption. The disruption in 1050 begins with the Israelites going to battle against the Philistines. They come down out of the mountains and they settle. They line up their armies in a place called Ebenezer. Ebenezer, the word means rock of help, and they were on this rock of help. and the Philistines came up and aligned their armies just opposite them. And in the first skirmish, the Israelites got thumped. So they pulled back to their camp at Ebenezer, and they determined that they need something. So they say, let's go get the Ark of the Covenant. So they send to Shiloh, to where Samuel is, and they get Hophni and Phinehas. Remember, they're Eli's two sons. And Hophni and Phinehas bring the Ark of the Covenant into the camp, and the Israelites begin to cheer. It's a wonderful thing. They somehow, they haven't been faithful to God. They've been half-hearted in their faith, but they kind of have a sense that this Ark of the Covenant will have the magic power to help them win this battle. So they go into the battle, round 2. And what happens is that Hophni and Phinehas are both killed, and that the Ark of the Covenant is captured. Well, a runner takes off from the battle when they see this happen, and he runs all the way back to Shiloh, and he goes to Eli, Hophni and Phinehas' father, the spiritual leader of Israel. And they tell him their sons are dead, the Ark has been captured, and Eli falls backwards out of his chair, breaking his neck, and he too is dead. That leaves 20-year-old Samuel as the next in line at the house of God in Shiloh. So let's take a look and see, in this time, there's a 7-month period where the Ark of the Covenant is gone into Philistine hands. And it really disrupts the entire worship life of Israel. It's kind of like COVID and us not gathering physically to worship together. It's a major disruption. And so I think there's some lessons for us to learn in this that will help us to look at this time where we are not gathering physically, and maybe some lessons for us when we begin to gather physically again as a body of believers. So in order to do this, I want to look at 3 things. I want to look at what God was doing during this 7 months. I want to look at what Israel was doing as this 7 months, through the 7 months and as it came to a close. And then I want to look at how Samuel led them beyond this 7-month time. So let's jump into the first one. What was happening with God? 7-month disruption. What was God doing when the Ark of the Covenant was in Philistine hands? Well, the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the temple of their God in the city called Ashdod. And in Ashdod, they put the ark in the temple of their god Dagon. They went away. The next morning they came in, and the idol of Dagon is laying face down beside the Ark of the Covenant. So what do? They put it back up, they secure it. And the next morning they come back in, and this time it's not only fallen down, but the head and the arms are broken off the idol, and somehow they are moved over by the door. This is, to them, has some spiritual significance, but they're not sure what. But then something happens. A plague of boils, of tumors on their body, and an infestation of rats racks the city of Ashdod. So they begin to think, well, maybe this has to do with the Ark of the Covenant. So they call some people and they move the Ark of the Covenant from the city of Ashdod to the city of Gath. Lo and behold, in the city of Gath, tumors break out. There's an infestation of rats. So they decide a third time, they move the Ark of the Covenant for the third time in the 7th-month period. They move it to the city of Ekron. And you guessed it, the rats, the tumors. But at this point, they are beginning to connect all of this very clearly with the Ark of the Covenant. So they look and they call the other 2 leaders from the other 2 cities together with these 3, and they call for a spiritual leader, priest of Dagon, to come, and they say, what are we going to do about this? And they say, well, you need to send the Ark of the Covenant back to the Israelites and see if the problems go away. And they said, well, how do we do that? Well, they said, you take 2 cows who've never hauled never worn a yoke. They've never hauled anything. But two cows who have just calved and have young calves, you put a yoke on them, you fasten them to a cart, you put the Ark of the Covenant in the ark, and then make 5 gold replicas of the tumors that we have and 5 gold replicas of the rats. Put them in a box beside the Ark of the Covenant. And here's the test. We'll send these cows out, and if they walk away from their calves in the opposite direction and they actually head towards Israel, we'll know that the God of the Israelites is behind all of this, and that if we're getting rid of the ark, it's a good thing for us. So they run the test, and lo and behold, the cows, calling for their calves the whole way, walk completely away from their calves. And they take the Ark of the Covenant up to the foot of the mountains to the Israelite community of Beth Shemesh. So that's what was happening with the Ark of the Covenant. That's what God was doing during those 7 months in Philistine. He was continuing to show his power in that culture. What was happening in Israel at the time? Let's take a look at that. 7 months, what was Israel doing? Well, on the day that Hophni, Phinehas, and their father Eli died and the Ark of the Covenant went missing, Phinehas's wife bore a child, a baby boy, and she died during childbirth, but the child was given a name, and that name was Ichabod. And it was given the name Ichabod because the people said, the glory of God has departed. God has left us. He's given up on us. And throughout the culture during those 7 months, this Ichabod thinking took hold, that God had abandoned people, that things, it was a deep sense of negativity that had settled over the people. How they were just looking for how great things could be back in the past, and they were feeling pessimistic about the future, and they were just settled into this Ichabod thinking. Then the Ark of the Covenant comes back to Beth Shemesh, and there are some big errors that are made at Beth Shemesh. See, the Ark of the Covenant comes, and the people of Beth Shemesh, they're really good at the ritual side of their religion. They get Levites to lift the Ark and set it on a rock, and they take the cart that's been hauling it and they cut it up for firewood, and they sacrifice the 2 cattle, and they celebrate with a burnt offering. That's the last we ever hear of the box with the gold in it. So we assume that disappears into the village of Beth Shemesh. And they're really good at the rituals, but they've been following the spiritual teaching of Eli, that teaching that has a sense of the shell of religion, but really not so much the power of God. And so they decide that maybe they should look in the Ark of the Covenant. There might be treasure in there for them too. And they pay a terrible price as a community for violating the Ark of the Covenant because they had forgotten about the power of God. They had thought the power of God was gone. So as a community, they decide that, well, let's send the Ark of the Covenant on to call the people of Kiriath Jearim and have them take the Ark of the Covenant there. So the Ark of the Covenant settles in at Kiriath Jearim. And I've said that that's a new normal because the Ark of the Covenant didn't go back to Shiloh. They didn't go back to the way things were before. It was now settled in Kiriath Jearim. And that's an important lesson for us to think about in this time of the COVID disruption. We may begin to think, I can hardly wait to go back to church the way it was. I can hardly wait to go back to, but this week I had a meeting with, that I sat in on with, a meeting with spiritual leaders from across the country, talking with Dr. Strang about reopening churches, and shared quite a few things from that. And one of the things he says is it's probably going to be a year or two that we are having to deal with even when we get to 50 people and we can reopen our church buildings, it's probably going to be a year or two before we have a vaccine or we have some hope of being beyond thinking of COVID-19 when we gather. He said, we've got to get used to a new normal. And the truth is, we can never go back. We can only move forward. So we need to be really giving some thought to how do we move forward into a new day of being able to add live gatherings to what we do in worship. And on Thursday night, I had an opportunity to begin to talk to some of our church leadership about that. And over the next month, we want to be able to spend some time talking and planning and thinking things through together so that by the end of this month, we have a plan for reopening when the time comes. We have a plan for reopening when we're allowed to gather as a group of 50 that we can share with everybody so that everybody knows the plan. One of the realities of any reopening is that everybody needs to know the plan, and we have to have a plan so that if any inspectors come to see what we're doing, they know that we're working according to the plans of the Department of Health. And so anyway, we will be sharing more of that with you later, but I wanted to, with this thought of Kiryat Jearim, just plant the thought that coming out of disruption, there's a new normal. So what happened with Samuel? How does he lead them beyond this? How does Samuel lead out of the 7-month disruption? Well, Samuel does two things as he leads them out of the disruption. The first thing that he does is he puts out a call to revival. Let me read for you from 1 Samuel chapter 7. Then Samuel said to all the people of Israel, if you are really serious about wanting to return to the Lord, get rid of your foreign gods and your images of Ashtaroth, determined to obey only the Lord, then he will rescue you from the Philistines. So the Israelites got rid of all of their images of Baal and Ashtaroth and worshiped only the Lord. One of the things that can help us thrive as we move through this is to allow this time to be a place where God sifts out of our lives things that maybe distract us from being wholeheartedly committed to him. Things that compete with God for influence in our lives. And our worship can become about being wholehearted towards God. Having done this, Samuel then calls all of the people of Israel to a community called Mitzvah. And he calls them there so that he can pray over them together and so that they can have some time of prayer and fasting before God. So the people come together at Mitzvah for Samuel to pray over them and for them to really encourage each other in their renewal to God. And think about that time when we can come and gather together and add gathered live worship to what we're doing. And there was this time, and the Philistines got word of it. And they saw Israel gathering together, so they thought, oh my goodness, they're going to come fight us again. So let's get the jump on them. So they gather their armies and they head for Mitzvah. The Israelites get wind of this and they're afraid. So what do? They do an amazing thing. Then they called on Samuel and they said, don't stop pleading to the Lord for us to save us from the Philistines. So they say the most important thing we can do to win any battle with the Philistines is we need to be right with God and we need to be calling out to him in prayer. So they invite Samuel to continue to pray and plead for them. They're not depending on the power, the magic power of the Ark of the Covenant. They're depending on the personal connection with the power of God. And so Samuel begins to pray. And it's interesting, as Samuel is praying, by the time he finishes the sacrifice and the prayer, the Philistines have arrived. And so there are the people, they're caught between their commitment to pray on one side and the challenges of the Philistines on the other. And then it says that the voice of God spoke as thunder, and he routed the Philistines. He threw them into disarray, and the Israelites chased them away. And then Samuel does a neat thing. He calls the people together, and he takes a large stone and he stands it up on its end. And he calls the stone Ebenezer. That place where they first had their problems, he now raises this stone and calls it Ebenezer, the rock of help. Because they're not looking to some magic power of the Ark of the Covenant. They're looking to the very presence and personal connection with God to be their help. And Samuel raises the stone and he says, this is Ebenezer because this far God has helped us. Implicit in his, or under the surface of his comment, is this idea that as you continue from this point, if you continue in prayer, if you continue to obey God alone, if you continue that personal connection with him and pouring your hearts out to him, he will continue to be your helper. That idea continues on through the New Testament. We begin to read in the Psalms, Psalm 121, look to the hills, from whence does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. Psalm 62, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. The New Testament, where it speaks of Jesus and says, see, I lay in Zion a cornerstone, that Jesus becomes the rock of our salvation. Folks, as we begin to look ahead, and we begin to look at how do we either survive or thrive through this 7 months of disruption, we need to commit ourselves to get rid of all the Ichabod thinking, all of the woe is me and all of the looking to the past and feeling like God has let us down. And we need to be like the Israelites and develop an Ebenezer thinking, the ability to talk to God in prayer, to be people of prayer, to be people of a wholehearted commitment to God, to be people who believe God has led us this far and he will continue to lead us in the future. This is a path to thriving. This is the path that God calls us on. We're going to go through lots of interesting adjustments and changes as this 7-month period and time moves beyond that. And some of that will be adding live gatherings to what we do, and it'll be a little different than anything we've done before, but God is not different, and he will continue to lead us through this. And remember Samuel's first 2 things he did in leadership. He invited the people to get serious about God, and then to come together to pray together. Well, folks, I invite you in the week ahead my wish for you is that you may thrive spiritually in the month of June, in this month ahead, and that you will thrive, that you will practice Ichabod thinking, or no, don't practice Ichabod thinking. Practice Ebenezer thinking. This far God has led us, and we will stick with him so he leads us further. Folks, I'll leave you with that thought. May you thrive spiritually in the month ahead.